Today I'm speaking with Jennifer Lahl. And Jennifer, are you the founder of the Center for Bioethics and Culture?
I am.
And it is you've done some really impressive films, and I enjoyed Exploitation. Recently saw The Lost Boys, and Breeders was my most recent that I watched in preparation for this conversation. And they're fantastic films. I've learned so much from you. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
We connected really briefly in a Twitter exchange recently, and there was this photo that was going viral on social media of a gay couple with a new baby, and they're posed in sort of this like very traditional looking mom just had a baby pose, and so it really inflamed a lot of people. There were a lot of strong feelings about this, but there were two men, and one of them is shirtless holding a newborn, and the other, his partner, is beaming over top of them, and they just have this very like happy family, but it's kind of jarring because where you expect to see the mother, you see a man. And this brought up a lot of feelings for a lot of people. And I was sent this photo by a friend, and she said, what does this make you feel? And she was really upset about it too. And I sort of had that initial feeling at first, and then I had this like step back. We're mobbing these people. They're a family. They're individuals. We don't know much about them except for the bones of the story. Mm-hmm. And I confess that I don't know very much about surrogacy, about the issue of surrogacy. And you offered to come on and talk with me and share some more information. One of the things that comes through in your films is maybe some of the interviews you've done, is the phrase big fertility. Mm-hmm. And so this seems like there's the dividing line between people just living their little lives and maybe a big industry that's more concerning or has some predatory aspects. So I will stop talking and let you talk a little bit. I would love to hear more about surrogacy and big fertility.
Yeah, sure. For your listeners who maybe don't know me, in a previous life, I was a pediatric critical care nurse for a long, long time, working in academic university hospitals. So obviously we saw the sickest of the sick, and a lot of those babies were born through assisted reproductive technology. So that was always kind of on my radar. And then I went back to graduate school and I founded the Center for Bioethics and Culture, and kind of got swept up in big fertility. And I, for one, am a big critic of medicine as it's improperly practiced today. We have big pharma, we have big trans medicine, we all have a lot of skepticism after the COVID lockdowns and forced vaccinations. People are overwhelmingly not signing up to be organ donors because there's a lot of fear and skepticism of medical ethics, and will I be rushed to death because they need my organs? So we already have, unfortunately, a very robust area of criticism and skepticism in medicine. And that is not separate from big fertility, which is what I've named it. I actually have a film called Big Fertility. It's all about the money. And I am a strong proponent of women's health. I'm a strong proponent of maternal child health and maternal child bonding, because all those things are part of health of moms and babies, bonding and healing and connecting. And my position is against surrogacy. It's not against gay men having babies through surrogacy. I'm as critical of heterosexual couples. I think it's a double criticism, though, because you saw my film Exploitation, and in the case of a same-sex male couple, the eggs almost always come from another woman, and then the womb comes from another woman. And that's a legal reason, because they don't want either one of those women to stake a claim and say, I'm the mother of the child, because then you get into these legal battles. And we've had a very prominent Supreme Court case in the state of California, which was the first gestational surrogate. That's surrogacy, where the woman's just providing her womb. Mm-hmm. And the court ruled against her. She didn't want the rights of the child. She wanted the rights to visit the child and stay connected to the child and know how the child is doing. That was all she was wanting. And the Supreme Court ruled against her because she's just the womb. She has no claim to this child. But the dissenting justice opinion, which I've read, I thought was very profound, because it said, without this woman's contribution, her whole body for 9 months, this child would not exist. And so we can't just discount that. So that, and when I was working at the University of California in San Francisco in the Peds ICU, my gay men friends will always just refer to us as breeders. The women were, it was joking, it was lighthearted, I was never offended. But they would just like, oh yeah, you're the breeders, we need you because you're the breeders. And so we use that word. And we got a little bit of pushback in the film for using that in the title. But the tagline was a subclass of women, ? We weren't saying women are breeders. We were saying, do we really want to treat women like this? So I've interviewed countless surrogates who've had horrible experiences. I've read dozens of contracts that surrogates sign. I've published peer-reviewed research in the United States, where we took women, gestational surrogate women, through our study, our survey, and have published that. And what we know is surrogate pregnancy is much higher risk than the woman's natural pregnancy. We know it's risky to women who sell their eggs, donate their eggs. So because of all those sort of things, and I see, because this is on one hand, it's an ethical debate. It's a debate around what is the role of medicine. We get upset when we see medicine doing things to transgender, non-conforming youth that they have no medical need. Did Chloe Cole really need to have her healthy breast cut off? The same with the surrogate mother, who's often a young mom herself. Does she need to do things that are risky and unnecessary with her body? And oh, by the way, she's often generously compensated. I'll stop there.
Well, yeah, it brings up so many questions. I think that for me, when I think of surrogacy, I've known two women who have been surrogate mothers. One was a woman that was just an acquaintance of mine, and she had done it several times. And this was when I lived back in Texas. She was, I think, the parent of one of my kids' friends. And I thought it was really strange. It just struck me as really strange that you would do this with your body, and that you would go through pregnancy after pregnancy, maybe 2-3 pregnancies. She was pregnant with a surrogate baby at the time. But I didn't really think much more of it. It just seemed I was a little bit off put, but I wasn't, I just didn't, I guess I didn't have a real big moral issue. It was more like pregnancy seems like such a serious thing. Like I've had, I guess, 4 emergency surgeries in my life. They've been around fertility. I had a miscarriage where I hemorrhaged and I had to be rushed in for too much bleeding. I had an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured. I had an ovary twist and had to have an emergency oophorectomy. And I had hemorrhaging after a pregnancy, 11 days after a pregnancy. So I've got 4 healthy kids, 4 healthy pregnancies, but my own story with fertility has been kind of harrowing. Like all of my interactions with emergency medicine have been around my female reproductive system. Wow. And so the idea of availing yourself of that or putting yourself through that, if you don't really have to, it just seems very significant. It doesn't seem like a trifling thing to mess with your reproductive system to me. So that was my impression when I met that first woman. The second one is actually a friend of mine who in her past, years before I knew her, was a surrogate for a gay couple. And I guess it just seemed like a nice thing that she did. So I had this picture in my mind of mostly this really organic process of people that know each other, doing a nice thing for each other. And there might be some compensation involved, but it's mostly like a donation of love of yourself. But when I saw the film Breeders and I saw this infrastructure behind it, this big money-making, enterprising system, it sort of changed my perspective. And hearing you talk about what an industry this is around the world, I would love to maybe hear a little bit more about that, because I think my image of it was a little bit rosy, silly, pansy, little childish image of what is really quite a serious industry.
Well, and that's why I always love having these conversations, because what I find is that most people, they start their thinking of surrogacy because of a personal story, and they see this loving couple that otherwise couldn't have a child, and this wonderful benevolent woman who's come in to help them, and that's where we sort of start thinking, which is not always the best way to start our thinking, because we don't, understand all the processes or consequences that go in before that. And back to your own personal story of so many reproductive problems that you had. I mean, we still, when you think of the United States being such a wealthy, developed nation, we have horrible maternal morbidity rates, maternal mortality rate. And when you double down on this with the complications that we know of surrogacy, and it's well documented in other studies, not just our own research, that these are high-risk pregnancies. And if you're in a high-risk pregnancy situation, the children that you're carrying, or child that you're carrying, baby, is also compromised. And Gail, one of the women in the Breeders film, was being a surrogate for her gay brother and his partner, to help them have a family. And she wasn't being compensated. She truly was doing what we call altruistic surrogacy. And she and the twins that she carried for her brother almost died, because in the medical literature, surrogate pregnancies, gestational surrogate pregnancies, where she's carrying a genetic baby from somebody else, they call it traditional surrogacy when the surrogate is also the genetic mom, which I don't like that phrase. Like when you think of the famous Mary Beth Whitehead baby M case, Mary Beth Whitehead was carrying her own genetic baby that she then sold for $10,000 to the Stearns. But in Gail's case, she and the twins almost died because she had high rates of very, very high preeclampsia, which is common in surrogate pregnancies.
You mentioned that when you were in neonatal care as a nurse, you noticed that a lot of the babies that were in treatment were from there was some kind of an intervention done in order to have that baby. And you also mentioned that surrogate pregnancies are higher risk. What are the factors that contribute to that?
The factors are she's carrying a baby that's not hers. Think of what happens when you get a splinter in your finger. It's a foreign object. Think about organ donations. I just can't give you my kidney if you need one. I mean, we have to do all kinds of tissue matching and typing, and, are we compatible? Are you going to reject the organ? And even if you're a good match, you still have to take anti-rejection medication the rest of your life. So the minute you put, even women who aren't doing surrogacy, but women who use donor eggs, they're going to have that reaction as well. So they're going to be in a higher risk category of pregnancy, because it's not their egg, it's not their embryo. So it's just that when you think of just natural conception, I'm really interested in, how can we help infertile bodies? And there's a lot of things that we can do to help women. And now men are different. Obviously a gay couple, they don't have eggs and they don't have a womb. But if you're just looking at the infertile woman, there's a lot that we can do. But because big fertility is lucrative, women who are struggling with conceiving are often just fast tracked. It's like there's so many parallels between gender. They're fast tracked to transition. They're fast tracked to the reproductive endocrinologist. Well, you have to go see the IVF doctor. You have to go see that. And we know now, because we've been at this since 1978 with the birth of Louise Brown, the first test tube baby, that just IVF babies in general are showing higher rates of problems. So back in my days at UCSF, most of the babies we were seeing were just babies that were created through IVF. As, in vitro fertilization, assisted reproductive technology, not necessarily a surrogate baby that was born of surrogacy, not necessarily a baby born of egg donation. Could have been, but we just know all of this, big fertility. And when we made the film Breeders, we intentionally, and the audiences don't pick up on this, but we intentionally interviewed 4 different surrogate women to tell the story around how this is always debated, whether it's debated legislatively or just debated amongst ourselves. So we interviewed surrogates that weren't being compensated. We interviewed surrogates that were traditional surrogates. If you remember Tanya in the film, Tanya, it was her own egg but she was having a baby for a gay couple using what I can't remember one of their sperm, and gave birth to a child. So, and she also wasn't compensated. We interviewed compensated surrogates. We interviewed people who did it for family members, for strangers, because a lot of times people recognize, oh, it could be an exploitative industry. So we'll regulate it. And that's that you get into that with the prostitution and sex work debate. Well, let's just regulate it, because it's gonna be there anyway. And so I am an abolitionist, but it's an abolitionist approach because of my concerns with maternal child health and well-being.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a fine ethical line to me, and maybe you can go into this a little bit, and between a woman who's pregnant and doesn't want to keep her baby, and a couple or another person coming in and helping her to carry that. Please keep your baby. We hear that story in the pro-life movement. Please keep your baby. We'll take care of you, and we'll take the baby once it's born, rather than having an abortion. What's the difference between that and intentionally getting pregnant and carrying that baby to term for someone who does the same thing?
So just so I'm understanding, you're asking me what's different than a woman who's in an unwanted pregnancy versus a couple who can't conceive going to a woman saying, help us have a baby.
Exactly. Like ethically, from a legal standpoint, if you don't have an agency involved and you don't have third parties involved, what's the legal ethical difference between those two scenarios?
Well, there's a couple of things. Is one, the woman who's just finds herself for whatever reason in a situation of an unwanted pregnancy. There was no big fertility that got her pregnant. Whether she had a one-night stand or whether she got pregnant with a boyfriend she's no longer lived, or whatever. There's a million reasons why women find themselves in situations. But she got pregnant just naturally and has decided, I can't raise this child. I'm willing to surrender. I hate that word, surrender the child to adoption. I never know what kind of language to use when you're, giving a person away. Unlike, and then another difference is, so like in California, if you're a surrogate in California, you waive your maternal rights before you even are pregnant. So before an embryo has even been transferred into you, you've legally waived and severed your maternal rights. In adoption, that's not the case. And it varies from state to state. And I'm not an expert on adoption law across the 50 states, but that you don't sever your maternal rights until well after that child is born and delivered, because you might change your mind. You might see that baby and go, oh, I can't do it. Or you still might be able to do it. Or you might sign away your maternal rights, but be in an open adoption. And have some kind of arrangement with the people who are going to raise your child. So those are distinctions. There's no money involved in adoption. You don't pay that mother for the baby she's given, and you pay the surrogate. And people go, well, we're not paying her for the baby. We're paying her for the 9 months pregnancy, the work she's doing. And I read the contracts. The money is attached to the baby. It doesn't ever say you can keep the baby. The baby, it says you'll get this much at the signing of the contract, then you'll get this much at this benchmark, and then you'll get this much, and then at the end when you give the baby, then you get the rest of it. So it's disingenuous language. So I think those are some of the biggest issues. Legally, financially, and just the medical aspect. Big fertility is involved in surrogacy. It's not involved in an unwanted pregnancy.
Gosh, you drew a parallel between this and the gender issue, and then going back to sex work as well. And I can see these things are all very tricky areas to regulate, because you're dealing with people's choice in how they use their own body, but you're also dealing with compensation and other incentives that are not natural incentives. So even back to sex work and pornography, would these people do this if there wasn't some compensation? And oftentimes, no, they wouldn't be doing this. How do you have a sense of how to conceptualize all of this legally? Is there a way to regulate or crack down on these activities from a legal standpoint, or is it just ethics?
Well, yes, you can. I mean, when you look at most of Europe, surrogacy is illegal in Europe. Overwhelming. I mean, I'm going to Italy in April to speak and in May to speak at 2 big separate conferences, because Prime Minister Meloni, all surrogacy is illegal in Italy, but Italians are allowed to fly to California or Canada,
Oh,
wherever. So they can come here and hire a surrogate and have a baby and go back to Italy. She's closing that loophole. So I'm told March next month, Italians will be prohibited from traveling outside the outside of Italy to go to other countries to hire surrogates. France has had surrogacy illegal since, it was a concept. It's tied to their language around slavery. Because, I always say, read a surrogate contract executed in the state of California and tell me how this woman isn't a slave for 9 months. Everything is controlled. And if she disobeys or she does something wrong, she's a breach of contract. So, I think it can be done. And back to your point about money, I was very involved in the fight in New York State because from when Mario Cuomo was the governor, way before, who was
is
the,
it is it Andrew Cuomo?
Yeah, Andrew. So Mario Cuomo was the governor when Mary Beth Whitehead case, which was a New Jersey case, came about. And at that point, he formed a task force and it did a very deep dive study. The task force said this cannot be distinguished from the buying and selling of children. And so the law of the land under his governorship was that altruistic surrogacy was legal. So women could do it, but they couldn't be paid because they were concerned about the buying and selling of children. Now, his son came, on the scene, and this was during the COVID lockdown. And the big argument, Senator Brad Hoylman, who's a gay man, married to a man, came twice to California to buy eggs and rent wombs in California, was crying in New York. Why do we have to go to California? Why can't we stay in New York? Women aren't lining up to help us for free because it was legal in New York State, but you couldn't be paid. So to me, I don't see how, and the law that eventually passed, so now women can be paid in the state of New York to be surrogates. And that was like, I think at the, I can't even find the bill anymore because it was passed during COVID. It was like 66 pages long because they tried to imagine every single problem, every single angle that might go wrong, and how can we protect all the stakeholders? And I always say, we've had many women in the United States who have died as complications of surrogate pregnancies. You can't legislate those health risks away. Why can't we drink and drive? Because we might kill ourselves. I'm a free spirit. I don't like a heavy-handed government approach on me. But when it comes to health, why are doctors asking otherwise healthy women who have no medical need to take these drugs, to undergo any of these procedures, to take on these risks for money? Where does that involve, having a place in medicine? And that's very much prevalent in the trans debate. These physicians who are recommending things that this person has no medical need. They might have a mental health, psychological need, but they don't need to be medicalized and surgicalized, with their bodies and drugs and surgeries, while doctors get rich. This is out there. Some of the richest doctors are fertility doctors. They're, NYU, the head of the fertility agency at NYU makes more than the provost. They bring in a lot of money. Columbia University, their fertility business at Columbia funds the whole entire OBGYN department. It's like their football team. You can't touch it. It's so lucrative.
Wow. Yeah. It just, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of the phrase "first do no harm," and I'm wondering what happened to that.
Yeah. But we get wrapped around her body, her choice.
Yeah.
Freedom, autonomy. We're all adults. We enter into these kind of contractual agreements, but they're very unequal. I'd like to see a surrogate contract that says if the surrogate dies, her family is compensated $10 million. Big fertility, well, how? Who's going to pay that? I have contracts in my file cabinet over here. If a surrogate they put a price tag on every single part of your fertile body. You'll appreciate that. If you lose your fallopian tube, we will pay you $2,500. If you lose your uterus as a result of the pregnancy, you will get $5,000. If you lose, an ovary, it's
Wow, it's amazing to try to put money to these things, to monetize these things. This is we had a conversation the other day for a Solid Ground live stream with Dr. Brett Alderman, and we were talking about pornography. And one of the things that came up in that conversation is the idea of consent, and how, in terms of our current culture's attitude towards sex positivity, it seems like anything goes as long as you're consenting. And that even goes as far as being hurt, being tortured, S&M stuff, being degraded, these things. Like, we have this idea that you can consent to anything. And now we have this in Canada, we see the movement of the MAID, the consenting to euthanasia, and I just wonder, this all seems like it comes back to medical ethics. All of this seems like it comes back to medical ethics.
Absolutely. I have no tolerance for a medical doctor looking somebody in the eye, knowing that this person has no medical need for anything I'm about to ask them to do, knowing that what I'm about to ask them to do is very risky, and I'm also paying them to do this. That's not medicine. So it really grieves me, because I care deeply about the medical profession. I mean, I was part of it for many, many years, and I do no harm. And it's like, how do we not abuse people in clinical trials, and experiment on people? And this is experimentation on people. It's also experimentation on these children that are yet to be born, because we know now that we've been doing assisted reproductive technologies for long enough, we have, good enough sample sizes and good enough data that, it's not all roses for the children that are created through these technologies either.
What are some of the things you see with IVF babies?
Higher rates of cancers, genetic abnormalities, especially like imprinting disorders in the whole space. We're just starting to learn epigenetics, the whole epigenetics, and what turns on and off genes and the signaling. And so we're seeing some of those imprinting, like Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, cancers. There's some speculation about autism, but that's, to me, that's a little dicier. But and also because a lot of IVF babies, and a lot of IVF babies that are either born of multiples, because a lot of people have multiples, they're premature. So they're just having the natural problems that babies born premature have, low birth weights, failure to thrive, some just learning disabilities, or, playing catch up as a result of being born premature. But, and, part of informed consent.
Yeah.
Even if it is, sometimes there's that desperation. You want that baby so bad. And it's, even though America isn't impoverished like the third world countries, and a lot of the third world countries have closed this down, the commercial surrogacy business, because they've seen their, really impoverished women harmed, and babies left that were born with, disabilities that the commissioning couple, left behind because they didn't want a disabled baby. But, you can't, this whole choice, if you take the money out of it, overwhelmingly women aren't going to do this. And in the United States, in our own research, we actually looked at financial demographics. And even though we don't have the poverty that third world countries have here, it's clearly women in the lower tax tiers based on the IRS standards of tax care. And most of the women that we interviewed in our research were partnered or married to men that had like GED, high school, maybe an AA degree. So it's lower educated, lower income, people that are doing it. It's heavily, my son's in the military, and military wives are heavily targeted to be surrogates.
Well, I can really see how it would be very tempting for a young mom who is stressed financially to think that I could get $20,000 and I could still do all of my normal tasks. All I have to do is hit a few extra doctor's appointments and keep living my life the way it is. And our family is going to get this giant bonus. Yeah. I can see how that would be really tempting.
Yeah. And in the film Big Fertility, it's one woman's story in that film, but she did 3 different surrogacies. One was a couple in France, a gay couple in France, because it's illegal in France. One was a heterosexual couple in Spain, and then one was a US couple. And she dropped out of high school, to take care of her mom who was battling cancer, who eventually did die. But she was able to keep her day job and make the surrogacy money. So it wasn't just like, and, she was, I want to say she was working at a Sonic or something. It was, not a highly paid job, but she was able to keep that job on top of the surrogacy compensation. And surrogates are paid additional $5,000 if they're willing to carry twins, or if they're willing to carry triplets, it's an extra 10,000. They usually get 5,000 extra for each extra baby. So she did 2 twin pregnancies, which meant she got more. And back to your friend or the woman you knew that did multiple surrogacies, if you're a proven surrogate, you are heavily recruited to do it again, and you're offered more money because it's all that disassociation. Not my body, I'm just the easy bake oven. You separate from your body. You're proven. You're not going to be ornery. You're not going to want to keep the baby. You're not going to give them grief. You do a good job, so we're going to reward you and pay you more to do it again.
Wow. So it's like you're a low stress, low risk baby carrier for us.
Yeah. And then when they age out, which is another similarity in prostitution, when they age out, they often go to work for the agencies, recruiting other women.
Wow.
So
What is the age range of surrogates?
well, it's usually not a numerical age. It's usually based on how many pregnancies.
Oh, okay. So there's a limit.
Yeah, and most of they call them either intended parents or commissioning parents. They're not going to want women that are in their 40s, because we just know women in their 40s, you're going to have a higher risk pregnancy, just one, because of your age.
Mm-hmm. So 20s and 30s and under a certain number of pregnancies.
Yeah, usually I've seen some ads. I lurk on all these sites. Sometimes it's no more than 6 pregnancies.
Oh.
Because the more pregnancies you have.
6. Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that might include your own children.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But when you think about surrogates, often, I've interviewed surrogates that have done, 3 pregnancies that were twins.
Oh my gosh.
It was 3 pregnancies, but it was 6 babies. Your body can only take so much. And we've had 2 surrogate deaths in California. And one was a first-time surrogate and one was a second-time surrogate. And the sad thing about the second-time surrogate, which is often common, the intended parents she had the first baby for came back to her and said, "Oh, it was so good. We had such a great experience. Will you do it again?" And she did, and she died. And can you just imagine? Oh, it's gut-wrenching. Every time you look at your baby, you know that, this husband, these children lost their mom so that you could have, it's just.
Yeah, it just, I guess I come back to the idea of how stunning it is that you could sell this part of your life because it is so full of risk. And I feel like every woman, for every mother that has beautiful, healthy children, every few moms has a story of some kind of miscarriage or something that happened around childbirth that was really scary. There's so much risk involved in this part of our lives.
Yeah.
And so many variables. That the idea that you could put price tags like $5,000 on an extra baby, I'm kind of stunned by this.
Yeah, but because they know it's extra risk.
Yeah. And I heard you also speak about transhumanism and these artificial wombs, the idea of womb implantation. This sounds like sci-fi. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Well, there's there's a lot of work being done. They're already trying to make, and they've already made in mice, they're trying to make synthetic eggs.
Wow, synthetic eggs.
Synthetic sperm.
Wow.
Then make synthetic embryos. They've already made, with mice, they've taken the skin cells from men. So eventually gay men won't need women, right? Because they will take their skin cells, they will reprogram them back to become egg, so they can make their own egg from their own skin cells. Then they have their sperm, and then maybe they'll have a uterine transplant, or we'll have these, synthetic uteruses. So there's a great book written by, I don't like this man, sorry if he's listening, Hank Greeley is a law professor at Stanford. He wrote it maybe 10 years ago, called The End of Sex. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Gattaca.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, the quest is a perfect baby, a perfect child. And, Hank Greeley says, pretty soon sex will just be for, fun. It won't be for baby making at all. Because why would you want, like the famous line in Gattaca is, why would you want to leave anything to Mother Nature? Why would you want to leave anything to chance? We have enough imperfections built into us already. Why not go for them? So his argument is that all babies will be made in the lab. And so we will just have this. And I actually think in my lifetime, I'm older than you, but I think in my lifetime, I will actually see babies gestated in artificial uteruses. Because I think that technology is really forging along. Now, whether a man who's presenting as a woman will be able to have a uterine transplant transplanted into him, and be able to gestate a baby and have a healthy live birth, I don't think that will ever happen. Just like I don't think we'll ever become transhumanism, humanist. I just think there's thresholds and barriers we'll never be able to crack without just destroying ourselves. But I think we can, synthesize and manufacture.
What is the line that would demarcate transhumanism in your mind?
Oh, gosh, I've never been asked that. I mean, like, how far do we have to go down?
Yeah, before we hit that.
Because so far we're able to do is like, the people that do like crazy implants to turn themselves into reptile-looking people.
Body modification.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever be able to cross into neural networks. They talk about being able to just like network all of our brains together up in the cloud, and you'll be able to walk into a conference room and everybody who's one of your contacts in LinkedIn, you'll just have this thing flash up in front of your eye that will go, "That's Leslie Boyce. She's up in the Pacific Northwest, she's married to Benjamin, and that's Stella O'Malley with Jen Spence." I don't think we'll ever be able to do that. I don't think we'll ever. It's like when they mapped the human genome way back in the early 2000s, I think, when Francis Collins, was part of that project, and they talked about all the junk DNA. You heard that phrase? And then they realized it wasn't really junk. It was the stuff we didn't really understand.
It's just we don't understand what we're doing.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this, I've hosted 2 conferences with transhumanism. One of our speakers was Nick Bostrom, the founder of the World Transhumanist Association. I've talked with, the real entropic people, the really far out ones that, she assured me that this wouldn't be forced on us. And we would be like the Amish in Lancaster, PA, that didn't have buttons and didn't have cars, and they could, live in their virtual worlds. Yeah, I just think the human body is too complex. I mean, it's so complex that we reject a foreign embryo in our womb as women. Our body says no.
Yeah. With what you said about IVF and all the things we're discovering about IVF babies, it seems like a synthetic egg and a synthetic sperm, I don't know what you would make with that. I don't know what kind of a life someone would have coming from that.
Yeah, well, there was a great article in, I think, the New Yorker a few months back now, and a lot of this is venture capital, angel funding coming out of the Bay Area. It's overwhelmingly funded by gay men who really don't want to have to be bothered with women. And I have a lot of gay men friends. I'm not gay men bashing at all, but I mean, that's who's really driving it. Because if we don't need the breeders to have the children we want, we can just, and oh, by the way, get rich. I mean, if you just Google how big fertility is, it's multi-billion dollar, and it's a growth industry. It's just growing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, in some way, it seems like the war of the sexes, like the women saying they don't need men and the men saying they don't need women. But then how do you reproduce?
Yeah. And well, so let's talk about a little bit of that too, because there are a lot of single women by choice who just go to the sperm bank and have children, through donor number 749, and then now we see the stories of, this guy has 800 kids out there and this guy has 700 kids, and they're going into Starbucks bathrooms and he masturbates over here and hands the sperm to her and she goes home and inseminates himself. When I was working in San Francisco, a lot of the female nurses would just get sperm samples from guys that we worked with and go home and inseminate themselves. I mean, it's just like the low tech turkey basters.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it sort of gets back to, what are our obligations and duties to children? Is
Mm-hmm.
it just what I want and what I can buy and what I can afford? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so,
And then there's the messy reality of families being all kinds of, I mean, there's divorce, there's death, there's reasons why someone might end up being raised in a less than optimal way. But to do it intentionally
yeah,
seems like it might open up a different line of inquiry and some different ethical questions.
yeah, yeah. It really does get back to the intentions and one of our films is called Anonymous Father's Day, and it's just 100% interviews with what we call donor conceived people, here on this planet because of overwhelmingly anonymous donation. And we talk about how they found out. And, because they all found out in different some are just told that from as early as, like an adoption, you're told,
Mm-hmm.
let your child know early on every day how they came to be in your family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some of them have just sprung upon them. One of the guys in the film, he calls him his bio dad. He was married to a female fertility doctor in England, and she used her husband as her sperm donor
Mm.
for 3 decades. So whenever she had to
Oh my goodness. So she was inseminating other women with his
her
sperm.
patient, her
Oh,
female
wow.
patients, she was inseminating with her husband's sperm for 3 decades. So Barry, who's Canadian, lives in Canada now. I guess he was British because his dad. So, he estimates that he has like 1,200. I mean, just kind of doing a rough calculation.
Wow.
How
Wow.
many half siblings could he have out there if this guy's for 3 decades the star donor?
And
But
he was aware that this was happening. He must have been. I mean, he must have been providing the genetic material.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow.
the question is, how many of those women knew?
Yeah.
Because a lot
Yeah.
of them aren't told. I mean, even Jenna Correa's got a great book. I always recommend it called The Mother Machine. Just in the early days of fertility medicine, how many of us women were just guinea pigs, not even being told, we're under surgery having, reproductive and, endoscopic surgery or laparoscopy, whatever. And they were just doing all kinds of other things while they're in there. And, women were oftentimes thinking that their husband's sperm was being used to inseminate them. And the doctor knew that the husband's sperm was not good.
Oh,
He
so
would
they were
use
just replacing it. Oh my goodness.
and wouldn't
Wow.
tell you. So all along, this couple is thinking they're, gave birth and are raising their own biological child, only to find out, much later. Netflix had a great um, uh, movie like 2 years ago, I think, of a physician. I think he's in Indiana who was doing that for years and years. And the adult children, because everybody's fascinated with genealogy and doing their 23andMe and some of the adult children discovered that they weren't genetically related to their father and started investigating and
Hmm.
connecting. I think
Hmm.
I can't
Do you
remember.
remember the name of that?
I
That
can't.
sounds
I
interesting.
gotta find it to you and put it.
Okay.
It was really well done, though. It was very well done.
Yeah, yeah. I know a woman who has a story like that, that she found out she was conceived artificially, and her father has at least hundreds of children because of something like that. He was a prolific sperm donor or some kind of I don't know what the story was.
Yeah.
It's really
But all this is
fascinating.
this is all of big fertility. And it's a whole reproductive tourism. I mean, you can buy and sell eggs and sperm through catalogs from all over, the world. The US is the largest provider of sperm to the world. But that doesn't mean it's all American guys that are providing the sperm. It means the US is in Denmark and in
Mm.
Germany and the Chinese come to the US because all of this is illegal in China and they love it because a baby born in the US is a US citizen. So they have a pathway to citizenship because they have a baby that was born in America. And it's just this whole, tourism, I mean, I've spoken at the United Nations 3 times on the global reproductive tourism trafficking business.
I heard you speak about India in particular, with women being asked to sign contracts that these women were illiterate, not able to understand what they were even being asked to do, to enter into. And so I start to picture like baby farms almost, like women who are just being completely enslaved in this way.
They're put in kind of like dormitories at a school. They're removed from their families or removed from their community. Part of that's shame. because they're doing this thing for somebody else or having a baby that they're selling. So there's a little stigma around that. And so they go and they live, and part of it's control, because we can know that she's eating properly, she's taking her prenatal vitamins, all that, because we've got a customer that's expecting, a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby. Then of course nobody cares about these women once they deliver. They don't care what their nutrition or their home life situation is. But that's one of the many reasons why India closed their borders, and there's no more commercial surrogacy allowed in India. It's, and it's only for, whether you like the law or not, the law is it's only available for heterosexual couples and they have to be married and they have to have a diagnosis of infertility.
Hmm.
So but those are all regulatory things. Are you happy about that? I don't.
When I was in law school, there was a case that I studied for a criminal law class where I think it was a California case. I don't remember the name of the case, and I don't even remember how it turned out. But there was a man who killed his wife, and she was pregnant. So he killed his wife and the unborn child. And the reasoning, when you read the judge's reasoning, the arguments in the case, a lot of things hinged on whether or not this baby was it a double homicide, or was this just a homicide? Was the baby a full human who was also murdered? And the arguments were really interesting, because if the baby is a full human who was also murdered, then the baby is protected by law in a way that compromises the woman's freedom in a pretty significantly, and that could set a precedent that would. And I think the judge even talked about regulating women, putting them in under lock and key so that they don't smoke, so they don't eat certain things during pregnancy. I mean, it really changes the way that a woman is regulated by law if you see the baby as a human being prior to birth. But that was a really interesting window into some bioethical argumentation. I don't know if you are familiar with that case.
I am. And I remember his name, Scott, and I can't remember the last name, because it actually took place close to where we live, and where the body was found was close to where we live. And I believe he's still in San Quentin, which is close to him, because he's still in prison. Yeah, that was, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't remember reading the legal opinions on that case, but I do remember it was kind of a sticky rub, because on one hand, and I think part of the argument, and maybe you know better than I, was because this was clearly a case of a wanted child. It wasn't like she wanted to terminate the pregnancy.
Yeah, she was pretty far along, I believe.
Yeah, so it was, the fact that, it would be different if she was on her way to Planned Parenthood to terminate the pregnancy, but she wasn't. She was setting up a nursery and, having baby showers and stuff. But it's all that control stuff, and that is evident. Again, when I work with my ragtag coalition of people, I always tell people I could figure out what's you're most passionate about and give you a story that would make you understand why surrogacy is bad. For a lot of feminists, it's this language in these contracts where she is enslaved. She's told what she can eat, if she can wear perfume, if she can travel, if she can have intercourse or not have intercourse, and who she has to have. Does whoever she has intercourse with have to be HIV tested? I mean, it's, one woman's contract, she waived her end of life decision making to the intended parents. So in case late in the pregnancy, she had some kind of a neurological trauma, that left her in a coma, who would decide if life support was pulled or maintained. And it was attached to how viable the pregnancy would be, so literally, some people just get really upset about and undone about just the economic injustices, because clearly Kim Kardashian isn't offering to be a surrogate for her Hispanic, low-income housekeeper. It's clear. I mean, we know who's doing it and who's buying and who's selling. There's some people that are just really into health, and why would we want to put these powerful hormones, fertility drugs that have links to cancer in healthy women that have no reason to take these kind of medications? Some people have a strong affinity toward the rights and well-beings of children, not to be products, not to be bought and sold, but to be welcomed into. One of the surrogates that we asked two open-end questions when we did our research. It was just this large survey of just the facts. And one of the interesting, that's when the magic happens, when you just open up the floor and ask these questions. One of the surrogates was a surrogate for a very affluent, I believe it was a husband and wife physician couple in New York. And I can't remember if it was the husband or wife. I think it was the wife, was like a neurosurgeon or neurologist, but that kind of a physician. And she had the surrogate come and live with her for 2 weeks so that the surrogate could nurse the baby. And then she would immediately hand the baby to the mother that was going to raise the baby. Because she understood, because of her training in brain, maternal-child bonding, how important that was. And she thought in that 2 weeks, she could sort of maybe mitigate that trauma by having that surrogate there. And I just think it's another double whammy for that surrogate, because again, you have to disassociate. And you've had children. I'm assuming you've nursed your children. I've nursed my children.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine just nursing a baby and then handing.
Right.
I mean, I just and for the baby too, who can't speak, we know enough from adoption that there's trauma. I mean, Nancy Berrier's book, The Primal Wound, talks about that in her research and work in adoption. And I'm not anti-adoption, but we at least know that the possibility for that trauma in separating a birth mom and the baby, and so we manage that in the child's life as they grow up. And you just Google adoptees; they have high rates of suicide and drug addiction, and because there is that primal wound trauma. But we will always have a need for adoption. We'll always have orphans. We'll always have situations where children need to be placed in homes where they can be cared for. But we acknowledge that there are possible problems, and so that we can be aware and on alert for those and manage them as they come up.
You mentioned earlier that you don't like a lot of law, that you tend to be someone who prefers to see things be, I guess, how did you say it? Kind of free-spirited. You don't want something over-regulated. And I feel the same way. And so it seems like it's a really interesting area to start to navigate. But these seem like, I know it's almost hard to use this argument in terms, but it seems spiritual. It seems like there's a spiritual, emotional thing that's being missed in this attempt to make human life into this very technical, rigid, legalistic, and categorical thing. And we're missing something really important. Like you're talking about the bond between the mother and child, and you can try to parse that and quantify it with data, but it's something that sort of transcends data.
Yeah. Well, let me say two things. First, I want to say, again, back to the trans debate. I loved how Florida decided to handle the trans debate, and they handled it through their medical professional societies, not legislatively. Mm-hmm. So the medical professional societies, and Leor Sapir wrote brilliantly about what they did. They just said, this is not what we're going to do. This is not medicine. We're not going to do this. Yeah. Versus legislatively, because legislation just changes. Somebody gets kicked out, somebody wins elections, somebody loses. You're just constantly battling. So I don't think the legislatively thing. Now, as far as the spiritual, it's a no-brainer. You can just watch baby animals in the wild, and they know their mother. They run to their mother. The mother knows their babies. Is that intuition? Is that spiritual? Is it biological? It's probably everything. It's probably all of that. And the same is true with human babies. You see all those little cute videos where the baby's crying, and then if this mother picks him up, he's like, "Oh, my mommy." Chloe Cole, when I interview her, she talks about that aha moment when she was in biology class and they were learning about the study with the monkeys, where they put the little baby monkeys in these cages with like a wire baby that's monkey.
The wire mother.
Yeah. And then the one that's kind of got a little cloth around it, and where they all gravitate toward the one that's got the cloth. And that was that moment that she went, I'll never be able to breastfeed my babies. I lost that. In graduate school, I had to read Oliver O'Donovan, who I think he's an Anglican priest. I think he's Anglican. And he's got a great book called Begotten, Not Made. Do we beget our children, or do we make them? Are we manufacturing? We went from procreating to reproduction, which makes it sound like you're just running a mimeograph machine and making millions of copies. You're manufacturing. C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, talks about the man molders, and our final conquest will be we abolish ourselves. That's a transhumanist. We're going to try to, Tower of Babel. We're going to climb up, and I think the Old Testament. I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but it's like they're building that tower, and then in the text it says, "And God looked down." So no matter how high up we can, so is that hubris? Is that pride? And I'm not a Luddite. I mean, we're on Zoom. I got microphones. I got my electric guitar here. You got your guitar. I'm not anti-technology, but I'm also appreciate and respect caution and prudence.
Mm-hmm. And, circling back to the medical ethics, I like that what you said about Florida. I think that's the way to go. Is I keep thinking, when you try to legislate, you're kind of over-engineering something after the fact. And you talk about that 6,000 page document where they're just, or 600 or whatever it was. Yeah. And it's just this like massive line by line trying to over-engineer something that just shouldn't have been in the first place. And so I wonder, when are we going to see medical societies wake up and recognize that money, you can't consent to everything, and money isn't the end, and first do no harm. And where are the doctors in all of this?
This is where I'm really always a pretty hopeful and optimistic person, but because there is so much money on the table for them, I don't see them walking away from it, which is why we don't see trans surgeons saying, I'm done doing this. This is wrong. They only stop it because they've gotten sued, or their institution like Washington University has shut down the clinic or whatever. So I'm not hopeful. There's no sympathy for surrogates. There's no sympathy for egg donors that are harmed. I mean, I've gone to hearings and testified with them and brought them with me, and there's absolutely no sympathy, because it's like, well, you were told, you did it, you signed the contract, you agreed, you took the money, so there's not a lot of sympathy for what you would consider the victims. Mm-hmm. There's, more sympathy, I think, for the victims of the trans debate, mainly because a lot of them are children or minors or were mentally ill and should have been, offered, good mental health care. So I don't really know, because I don't see the physicians closing up shop. I don't see people stopping to hire surrogates. I think if anything, it's booming. I mean, once same-sex marriage was legalized in the United States, then the floodgates opened for same-sex couples to engage in surrogacy. And not that they couldn't have before, but I think just having the legal structure of being married, and then your family's more protected because you're legally recognized as a family. Mm-hmm. I always just try to get to women: stop renting your wombs and stop selling your eggs. It's dangerous. It's harmful to you. Can we work on policies that make it so women have economic opportunities that don't require them? Why do military wives overwhelmingly rent their wombs? Because they're poor. Mm-hmm. Can we pay people better? Can we provide things for women so they can raise their family and pursue education, raise their family while still work? What kind of opportunities can we give to women so they don't feel like I have to do this? Because we know if we take the money out of it, Leslie, we know if we take the money out of it, they're not doing this just out of the goodness of their heart. Yes, they are kind people, but if you said, oh, but we can't pay you now, they'd be like, I'm going to find something else to do. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an economic issue that if we can solve that, but again, I don't see a lot of hope for solve, because women have been fighting for those kind of economic opportunities for a long, long time. So.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of the experiment with a kid where you put something in front of them and tell them if they wait 5 minutes, they'll get something even better, but they can't often wait. It's like a developmental thing. You got to weigh short-term benefit against long-term benefit. And when the short-term benefit is so big, like $20,000, and you think all the long-term risks are potential, it's
Yeah.
a really tricky place to be as somebody who's in a disadvantaged position. So
And it really colludes informed consent.
yeah.
When you know you're being told it's risky, but I have mounting student loan debt.
Mhm,
I'm going to take, it's like the smoker. I won't get lung cancer.
mhm, mhm,
It's like the alcoholic who goes, well, just one more drink. It's not that bad. It's
mhm.
it's hard to say no when there's a need or an impulse or something that's driving that. So that I think informed consent in the medical world has no business with money being on the table, you know.
Yeah, yeah, it really changes incentives. Well, Jennifer, this has been such a fascinating conversation. It's a departure from the kind of usual conversations that I've been having on this channel. Most of what I've focused on is social justice ideology in psychology and education. So this is something that's a little bit different. And my mind is open. I'm really interested. I want to learn more. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to get into these issues with me.
Oh, I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. Where can people, if you, I'll put all the links that you've provided me into the description, but if you want to just say out loud where people can find you in case somebody's just listening.
Yeah, I really spend most of my time on Twitter, so you can find me at Jennifer Lahl on Twitter. And I highly recommend people go to our YouTube channel, the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network YouTube channel, because all our films are there for free viewing. So you can.
That is amazing that they're provided for free. Well, thank you. I hope people will follow up, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.